16 years ago, a 36-year-old mother of 2 children in Lincoln, Nebraska, vanished after stopping at a local ATM, leaving her children waiting for her return. Police suspected robbery gone wrong since her car and bank card were missing, but with few leads and grainy surveillance footage, the investigation eventually hit a dead end. Yet over the years, Barbara Robinson's sister never gave up, keeping a porch light burning every night as a symbol of hope, until modern DNA technology uncovered a critical detail. A fingerprint overlooked in 2009 suddenly revealed a trusted neighbor, shaking the community and changing the case forever. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit subscribe for more true crime documentaries. The neon lights of Lincoln's First National Bank were still glowing when Barbara Robinson pulled her silver Honda Civic into the empty parking lot on March 15, 2009. A fine mist hung in the air, the kind of early spring drizzle that makes everything look ethereal under the amber streetlights. The digital clock on the bank's facade read 9:42 p.m. as Barbara stepped out of her car, her grocery store uniform still crisp despite a long shift that had started before dawn. At 36, Barbara Robinson embodied the quiet strength that defines so many Midwestern mothers. Her auburn hair was pulled back in the practical ponytail she wore to work, and her worn sneakers spoke of someone who spent her days on her feet, serving customers with the genuine smile that had made her a favorite at Peterson's Market. She had worked there for nearly 8 years, taking pride in knowing regular customers by name and remembering their preferences. The parking lot was deserted, except for Barbara's car, its engine ticking as it cooled in the damp air. Security cameras mounted high on the bank's brick exterior captured her approach to the ATM, her movements purposeful and routine. This was a familiar stop. She often withdrew cash after work to buy groceries or small treats for her children, 12-year-old Emma and 9-year-old Michael, who were waiting at home just 6 miles away on Maple Street. Barbara inserted her card and punched in her PIN with practiced efficiency. The machine dispensed $80 in crisp 20s, which she folded carefully into her wallet. According to the bank's electronic records, the transaction was completed at exactly 9. She turned toward her car, keys already in hand, unaware that this mundane moment would be the last time she would ever be seen alive. The surveillance footage, grainy and black and white, shows Barbara walking back to her Honda. Then, at 9:44 p.m., the camera angle shifts, and she disappears from view. What happened in those crucial seconds would remain a mystery for 16 years. Meanwhile, at the Robinson house on Maple Street, Emma and Michael sat at the kitchen table, homework spread before them, glancing occasionally at the clock. Their mother had promised to pick up milk on her way home, and they were waiting to have the chocolate chip cookies she'd baked the night before. The house smelled faintly of vanilla and cinnamon, remnants of Barbara's weekend baking session that had filled their freezer with treats for the week ahead. "Mom should be back by now," Emma said, looking up from her algebra homework. She had inherited her mother's sense of time and responsibility, often acting as a second mother to Michael when Barbara worked late shifts. Michael, absorbed in a social studies project about Nebraska's history, barely looked up. "She probably stopped to get gas," he mumbled, though a small knot of worry was beginning to form in his stomach. His mother was punctual to a fault, always calling if she was going to be more than 15 minutes late. By 10:30 p.m., both children were standing at the living room window, peering through the sheer curtains at the empty driveway. The porch light cast a warm yellow glow over the concrete steps where Barbara usually hurried up with armfuls of groceries. The silence in the house felt heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on Barbara's sister, Patricia Wells, lived just 3 blocks away, and by 11 p.m., her phone was ringing. Emma's voice was small and frightened when she called her aunt. "Aunt Pat, Mom went to get money and buy milk, but she's not back yet." Her phone goes straight to voicemail. Patricia felt her heart sink. She knew her sister better than anyone, and Barbara would never leave her children wondering where she was. Something was terribly wrong. Within minutes, Patricia was at the Robinson house, her own husband staying home with their teenage son while she took charge of Emma and Michael. The night stretched endlessly as Patricia called Barbara's friends, co-workers, and even the emergency room at Bryan Medical Center. Each call yielded the same result. No one had seen Barbara since she left work at 9 p.m. Her car was nowhere to be found, and her cell phone continued going straight to voicemail, suggesting it was either dead or turned off. As dawn broke over Lincoln's quiet neighborhoods, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, the reality became undeniable. Barbara Robinson, devoted mother and reliable employee, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense of dread that would consume her family and community for years to come. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds at 425 Maple Street, casting long shadows across the breakfast table, where Barbara Robinson should have been pouring orange juice and packing lunches. Instead, Patricia Wells sat in her sister's chair, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long since gone cold, watching Emma and Michael pick at bowls of cereal neither child wanted to eat. Patricia had barely slept, spending the night calling hospitals, checking with neighbors, and driving the route between Barbara's workplace and the bank, hoping to spot the silver Honda Civic, parked somewhere with a simple explanation. A flat tire, a dead battery, anything that would bring her sister home. But as the clock struck 7 a.m., and Barbara's alarm began its cheerful beeping from the bedroom upstairs, Patricia knew it was time to call the police. Officer Janet Martinez arrived at 8:15 a.m., her squad car's presence immediately drawing the attention of neighbors who began gathering on porches and sidewalks, coffee cups in hand, whispering among themselves. Martinez, a 15-year veteran of the Lincoln Police Department, had handled dozens of missing person cases, but something about Patricia's composed desperation and the children's frightened faces told her this wasn't a case of someone stepping out of their life voluntarily. "When did you last speak with your sister?" Martinez asked, her notepad ready, as she settled into the living room where family photos smiled down from every surface. Barbara at Emma's school play, Michael's baseball games, and family vacations to the Nebraska State Fair. "Yesterday around 2 p.m., Patricia replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She called during her break at Peterson's. "We were planning to take the kids to see that new movie this weekend." She was excited about it. She'd been working extra hours to save up for little treats like that. Martinez nodded, making notes. "And her normal routine after work?" Emma spoke up, her 12-year-old voice sounding much older than her years. "Mom always comes straight home, unless she needs to stop for groceries or gas. She never goes anywhere without telling us first. Even if she's just going to Aunt Pat's house, she calls." The officer's expression grew more serious as she learned about Barbara's reliability, her devotion to her children, and her predictable schedule. This wasn't a woman who would disappear on a whim or leave her children wondering. Martinez radioed for additional units and requested a detective be assigned immediately. Detective Ray Kowalski arrived within the hour, his weathered face and methodical manner instantly reassuring to the family. A 22-year veteran with the department's Criminal Investigation Division, Kowalski had seen enough missing person cases to know that the first 24 hours were crucial. He began by establishing a timeline, working backward from Barbara's last known location. "The bank's surveillance system will be our starting point," Kowalski explained to Patricia as they stood in the kitchen. "We'll also need her phone records, bank statements, and a list of anyone who might have known her schedule." By noon, the first search teams were assembling in the parking lot of Peterson's Market, where Barbara's coworkers had gathered despite being scheduled for time off. Store manager Bill Peterson, a grandfatherly man who had known Barbara since she started working there, organized volunteers with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing people. "Barbara is family to us," Peterson told the growing crowd of searchers. "She's helped train half our staff, covers shifts when people are sick, and never misses a day unless one of her kids needs her. Something bad has happened, and we're going to find her." The search expanded throughout the afternoon, with teams covering a grid pattern radiating out from the bank. Volunteers walked through Antelope Park, checked construction sites, and knocked on doors throughout the Belmont neighborhood where the ATM was located. The Lincoln Journal-Star arrived to document the effort, and by evening, Barbara's disappearance was the lead story on local news broadcasts. Meanwhile, Detective Kowalski was piecing together Barbara's final hours. The surveillance footage from the bank showed her arriving alone, conducting a normal transaction, and walking back toward her car. But the camera angles didn't capture the parking lot area where her Honda was parked, leaving a crucial gap in the timeline. Her car is the key, Kowalski told Patricia, as the first day of searching concluded without success. Someone either took her with the car, or something happened that prevented her from driving home. We've put out a BOLO alert to all agencies within a 200-mile radius. As evening fell over Lincoln, Patricia made a decision that would define the next 16 years of her life. She walked out to Barbara's front porch and flipped on the light switch, watching as the yellow bulb illuminated the empty driveway and the hopeful welcome mat Barbara had placed by the door. "I'm leaving this on until she comes home," Patricia whispered into the gathering darkness, not knowing that her simple act of faith would soon become a symbol recognized throughout their community and beyond. Dawn broke cold and gray over Lincoln on March 17th, marking 48 hours since Barbara Robinson had vanished from the First National Bank parking lot. Detective Ray Kowalski stood in that same lot at 6 a.m., coffee steaming in the frigid air, as he studied the scene with fresh eyes. The pavement was still damp from overnight rain, and the ATM's fluorescent glow seemed harsher in the morning light, casting sharp shadows that hadn't been visible in the grainy surveillance footage. The Lincoln Police Department had mobilized its largest search operation in recent memory. Sergeant Lisa Chen coordinated teams from her command post at the nearby community center, where volunteers had been arriving since 5 a.m., clutching thermoses of coffee and wearing determined expressions. The organization was impressive. Retired military personnel naturally took leadership roles, dividing the city into search grids, while experienced hikers tackled the wooded areas along Salt Creek. "We're treating this as an active crime scene investigation with search and rescue protocols," Kowalski explained to the assembled volunteers. Behind him, a large map of Lancaster County was marked with colored pins, indicating areas already searched, areas of priority, and locations where Barbara's silver 2006 Honda Civic might be hidden. The car remained the most perplexing element of the investigation. Modern vehicles weren't easy to make disappear. They had VIN numbers in multiple locations, required registration, and left digital footprints through automatic license plate readers scattered throughout the city. Yet Barbara's Honda had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. Officer Martinez had spent the previous day interviewing employees at every business within a 5-mile radius of the bank. The Sinclair gas station across the street had no surveillance cameras, but the clerk remembered seeing a silver car in their lot around 10 p.m. that night, though he couldn't be certain it was Barbara's vehicle. "The timeline is everything," Detective Kowalski muttered to himself as he reviewed the case file. Barbara's cell phone had pinged the tower near the bank at 9:45 p.m., just 2 minutes after her ATM transaction. Then nothing. The phone either lost power or was deliberately turned off, creating a digital void that frustrated investigators accustomed to tracking people through their electronic footprints. Meanwhile, the physical search expanded beyond Lincoln's city limits. Teams combed through Pioneers Park, where the wooded trails and secluded areas could conceal evidence. Volunteers waded through the marshy areas near Oak Lake, probing the muddy banks with sticks, while others checked abandoned buildings in the industrial district south of downtown. Patricia Wells had transformed Barbara's house into an unofficial command center, coordinating with law enforcement while managing the steady stream of neighbors bringing casseroles and offers of help. The kitchen table was covered with maps, phone lists, and printed emails from people who claimed to have seen Barbara or her car. Each lead required investigation, no matter how unlikely. Someone called and said they saw a silver Honda at the Walmart on North 27th Street, around midnight. Patricia reported to Detective Kowalski during his evening briefing. The caller thought the driver looked distressed, but they didn't get a license plate number. Kowalski nodded, adding the tip to his growing list. "We'll check their security cameras tomorrow. Every detail matters right now." The search took on an almost military precision. As the days passed, teams documented their routes with GPS units, took photographs of anything unusual, and maintained radio contact with the command post. Local businesses donated supplies, McDonald's provided coffee and breakfast sandwiches, while Home Depot contributed flashlights and batteries for the volunteers working extended hours. Barbara's co-workers at Peterson's Market organized their own search efforts, focusing on areas they knew she frequented. They checked the small parks where she took her children, the library where she helped with homework research, and the Dollar General, where she shopped for household necessities. Each location yielded the same result: no trace of Barbara or her vehicle. The Nebraska State Patrol joined the investigation on day 4, bringing cadaver dogs and specialized equipment for searching large areas. The German Shepherds worked methodically through Wilderness Park, their handlers watching for any change in behavior that might indicate they'd detected human remains. The dogs found nothing, which was somehow both relieving and frustrating for the search teams. Local media coverage intensified as the search expanded. Channel 8 News ran nightly updates, showing aerial footage of the search areas and interviewing family members. Barbara's photograph appeared on missing person websites across the Midwest, generating tips from as far away as Kansas City and Des Moines. Each tip required follow-up, stretching the police department's resources thin. "We're not giving up," Detective Kowalski assured Patricia during a briefing at the end of the first week. Missing person cases often break when someone remembers something they initially thought was unimportant. "We're building a complete picture of your sister's life, and eventually, something will point us in the right direction." As the search entered its second week, the reality was becoming harder to ignore. Barbara Robinson had vanished more completely than seemed possible in the digital age, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense that they were searching for more than just a missing person. They were searching for answers to a crime that grew more puzzling with each passing day. The Lincoln Community Center hadn't seen this much activity since the county fair. By March 25, 10 days after Barbara Robinson's disappearance, the building had become the unofficial headquarters for what locals were calling the largest volunteer effort in Lancaster County history. Tables lined the main hall, covered with maps, flyers, and sign-up sheets for search teams, while a constant stream of neighbors arrived with donations of food, supplies, and determined offers to help. Mayor Janet Morrison called an emergency town hall meeting for that Wednesday evening, and by 7 p.m., every seat was filled with concerned residents. The atmosphere was tense with worry and speculation. Lincoln was a city where serious crimes happened to other people, in other places. Barbara's disappearance had shattered that comfortable illusion. "We're dealing with something unprecedented in our community," Mayor Morrison began, her voice carrying over the packed auditorium, "but I've never been more proud of how our neighbors have responded. In 10 days we've had over 800 volunteers participate in search efforts." Detective Kowalski provided an update on the investigation, carefully avoiding details that might compromise the case. "We're following multiple leads and working with state and federal agencies. Mrs. Robinson's disappearance is our department's top priority, and we won't rest until we have answers." The meeting quickly became a forum for community concerns and theories. Sarah Martinez, who lived 2 blocks from the bank, stood to address the crowd. "My daughter won't walk to school alone anymore. None of the kids will. We're all wondering, is there someone dangerous out there? Should we be afraid?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Lincoln's sense of safety had been fundamentally shaken. Parents were driving children to activities they'd previously walked to, and evening joggers were staying home after dark. The psychological impact extended far beyond the Robinson family. Patricia Wells, who had become the unofficial spokesperson for the family, addressed the crowd with remarkable composure. Barbara would be overwhelmed by this support. She always said Lincoln was the perfect place to raise children because neighbors look out for each other. "You're proving her right." The investigation had generated dozens of tips, each requiring careful follow-up. The most promising came from Marcus Thompson, a delivery driver for Prairie Foods, who had been working late the night Barbara disappeared. He'd been unloading a truck at the Hy-Vee on 27th Street when he noticed a silver sedan speeding northbound on 20. "I remember thinking whoever was driving was in a real hurry," Thompson told Detective Kowalski during his interview. "The car ran the red light at Superior Street, which caught my attention because you don't see that much around here. Could have been a Honda, but I can't be sure." The timeline was intriguing. If the car was Barbara's, someone else was driving it 30 minutes after her ATM transaction. Kowalski had traffic engineers review the signal timing at that intersection. confirming that running the red light would have been necessary to maintain the speed Thompson described. Another lead came from teenage couple Amy Chen and Jake Morrison, who had been parked at Holmes Lake around 11 p.m. that same night. Amy's father owned a body shop, and she had an eye for vehicles. "I'm pretty sure it was a silver Honda Civic," she told investigators. "It pulled into the parking area, but didn't turn off the engine. After maybe 2 minutes, it left really fast, spinning gravel." Holmes Lake was 12 miles northeast of the bank, an unusual destination for someone from Barbara's neighborhood. The lake was popular with teenagers and fishing enthusiasts, but it was not the kind of place a mother of two would go alone after 10. Detective Kowalski made a note to have the area searched more thoroughly. The most disturbing lead came from Barbara's own neighborhood. Elderly Walter Kowalski, no relation to the detective, had been walking his arthritic dog around 10:30 p.m. when he noticed a car parked in the alley behind Maple Street with its engine running but no lights on. The car left quickly when Walter's dog began barking at something in the shadows. "I should have paid more attention," Walter told Patricia with obvious guilt. "At my age, you learn to mind your own business, but maybe I should have checked what was bothering Rex." The alley behind Barbara's house became a focus of intense investigation. Crime scene technicians found tire tracks in the soft earth, but March's frequent rain had degraded them beyond usefulness for comparison. However, they did find something interesting: a partial shoe print near the Robinsons' back gate, a size 11 boot with an unusual tread pattern. "We're building a timeline that suggests someone knew Barbara's routine," Detective Kowalski confided to Patricia during a private briefing. "The locations and timing aren't random. Whoever did this had been watching her." Local businesses stepped up their security measures in response to the community's fears. The bank installed additional cameras covering the parking lot, while other businesses began keeping exterior lights on all night. Peterson's Market organized a buddy system for employees leaving after dark, and several churches offered evening safety programs. The search for Barbara continued, but the investigation was evolving from a missing person case into something more sinister. The early leads painted a picture of careful planning and deliberate action. Someone had taken Barbara Robinson, and they had done it with methodical precision that was beginning to terrify everyone involved. 3 weeks into the investigation, Detective Ray Kowalski sat in his cluttered office at 3 a.m., surrounded by evidence boxes, forensic reports, and crime scene photographs that told a frustratingly incomplete story. The Barbara Robinson case had consumed his department's resources and his personal life, yet they seemed no closer to answers than they had been on day one. The coffee maker in the corner gurgled, producing its 5th pot since midnight as Kowalski reviewed the evidence for what felt like the 100th time. The surveillance footage remained their most significant piece of evidence, but also their greatest source of frustration. The bank's security system was state-of-the-art for 209, but the cameras had been positioned to monitor the ATM and building entrance, not the parking lot where the crucial events had occurred. The grainy black and white images showed Barbara completing her transaction and walking toward her car, but then she disappeared from view behind a concrete pillar that blocked the camera's line of sight. "We've got 43 seconds of missing time," Kowalski muttered to Officer Martinez, who had volunteered to work the overnight shift reviewing evidence. 43 seconds between when she leaves the ATM and when she should have been driving away. That's barely enough time to walk to her car, let alone for someone to approach her, control her, and drive away. The forensic evidence was equally challenging. Crime scene technicians had processed Barbara's ATM card, which had been found in the machine's slot the next morning. Evidence that her transaction had been interrupted before she could retrieve it. The card yielded several fingerprints, but most belonged to bank employees who had handled it during routine maintenance. There was one partial print that didn't match anyone in the system, but it was too smudged to be useful for identification. More promising was a single fiber found caught on the ATM's card slot. The lab identified it as blue cotton, consistent with a work shirt or uniform. Barbara had been wearing her grocery store uniform, which was navy blue polyester, so the fiber likely came from someone else. But blue cotton was common enough to describe half the adult population of Lancaster County. The investigation's most significant breakthrough had also become its most maddening dead end. Barbara's cell phone had been located using GPS triangulation and found in a dumpster behind a Burger King 6 miles north of the bank. The phone was intact, but had been deliberately destroyed. Someone had removed the battery and poured soda over the internal components, making data recovery impossible. Whoever did this knows about electronics. The department's tech specialist, Officer Dave Kim, reported to the investigation team. They didn't just throw the phone away, they made sure we couldn't recover text messages, call logs, or location data. This suggests planning and technical knowledge. The location of the phone provided another clue and another frustration. The Burger King was situated along a route that would make sense for someone driving from the bank toward Holmes Lake, where the teenagers had reported seeing a silver Honda. But the dumpster was emptied 3 times a week, and the phone could have been there anywhere from a few hours to several days. Detective Kowalski had interviewed over 200 people in the first month of the investigation: Barbara's co-workers, neighbors, family members, and casual acquaintances. Each interview revealed the same picture. Barbara Robinson was predictable, reliable, and cautious. She didn't take risks, didn't have enemies, and didn't associate with anyone who might wish her harm. The victim profile is actually working against us, Kowalski explained to his supervisor, Lieutenant Sarah Davidson. Barbara was so consistent in her routine that anyone watching her would know exactly where she'd be and when. But she was also so well-liked and normal that we can't find anyone with a motive to hurt her. The financial investigation had yielded no useful leads. Barbara's bank accounts showed modest savings and regular, predictable spending patterns. She had no significant debts, no suspicious financial relationships, and no unexplained transactions. The $80 she withdrew from the ATM that night had been intended for groceries and children's activities, a detail that made her disappearance seem even more senseless. The search for Barbara's Honda Civic had expanded to neighboring states, with law enforcement agencies from Iowa to Colorado checking impound lots, used car dealers, and chop shops. The National Insurance Crime Bureau had flagged the vehicle in their database, and every auto auction within 500 miles had been contacted. Yet the car had vanished as completely as Barbara herself. Modern cars are almost impossible to make disappear, explained Detective Mark Stevens from the Auto Theft Division. Between VIN numbers, computer chips, and GPS systems, there are dozens of ways to track a vehicle. Either this car is hidden somewhere very remote, or someone with sophisticated knowledge has dismantled it completely. The investigation had generated over 400 tips from the public, ranging from credible sightings to psychic visions. Each tip required follow-up, stretching the department's resources thin and raising false hopes for the family. Patricia Wells had personally responded to dozens of calls from people claiming to have seen Barbara in cities across the Midwest, traveling to investigate leads that inevitably led nowhere. As spring turned to summer, the harsh reality was becoming undeniable. Despite the massive investigation effort, they were no closer to finding Barbara Robinson than they had been on the night she disappeared. The case was growing cold, and everyone involved knew it. 1 year after Barbara Robinson vanished from the First National Bank parking lot, Detective Ray Kowalski stood in the evidence room staring at boxes labeled Robinson Barbara Missing Person Case. The cardboard containers held a year's worth of investigation, witness statements, forensic reports, photographs, and evidence bags containing items that had initially seemed promising, but ultimately led nowhere. The stack reached nearly to his shoulder, a physical representation of the department's exhaustive efforts and ultimate frustration. "We're not closing the case," Lieutenant Sarah Davidson assured Patricia Wells during what had become a painful annual meeting. "But we have to be realistic about resource allocation. Without new evidence or witnesses coming forward, active investigation has to be scaled back." Patricia sat across from Davidson in the conference room, where she'd attended dozens of briefings over the past 12 months. The walls were covered with maps, timelines, and photographs that had become as familiar to her as the rooms in her own home. Barbara's smiling face gazed down from the victim board, surrounded by red strings connecting various pieces of evidence that had never quite formed a complete picture. "What does that mean exactly?" Patricia asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd seen other families go through this transition from active investigation to cold case status. The daily phone calls would stop, the detective assigned to the case would be moved to new crimes, and Barbara would become another file number in a cabinet full of unsolved mysteries. It means we continue following up on any new leads, but we can't justify keeping 2 detectives assigned full-time, Davidson explained gently. Detective Kowalski will remain the primary investigator, but he'll be handling other cases as well. The impact on the family had been devastating, but not immediately visible. Emma, now 13, had become fiercely protective of her younger brother, and almost maternal in her relationship with Patricia, who had gained custody of both children 6 months after Barbara's disappearance. Michael, who had just turned 10, struggled with nightmares, and had developed an obsessive need to know where everyone was at all times. He calls me every day after school, even though I'm always here, Patricia confided to Dr. Helen Martinez, the family therapist, who had been working with the children. He can't handle uncertainty anymore. When someone leaves the house, he needs to know exactly when they'll be back and what route they're taking. The house on Maple Street had become a shrine to hope and endurance. Barbara's bedroom remained exactly as she had left it, with clothes still hanging in the closet, and reading glasses on the nightstand next to a half-finished novel. Patricia paid the mortgage and utilities, maintaining the house as if Barbara might return at any moment, even though she'd moved the children to her own home 3 blocks away. But it was the porch light that had become the most powerful symbol of the family's refusal to give up. Every evening at dusk, Patricia would drive to Barbara's house and flip the switch, illuminating the front steps where her sister used to sort through mail and call goodnight to neighbors. Local news stations had featured the ritual in their anniversary coverage, and gradually other families dealing with missing loved ones began leaving lights on as well. The porch light has become bigger than just Barbara's case, explained Channel 8 reporter Jennifer Walsh, who had covered the story from the beginning. We get calls from families in other states who've started their own porch light vigils. It's become a symbol of never giving up hope. The community response had evolved from active searching to quiet support. Local businesses continued displaying Barbara's missing person flyers, even though the photographs were fading, and the information was over a year old. Peterson's Market had established a memorial scholarship in Barbara's name, awarding $1,000 annually to a local high school senior planning to study education or social work. Detective Kowalski found himself thinking about the case during his off hours, reviewing evidence files while his own family watched television. The partial fingerprint, the blue fiber, the precise timing of Barbara's disappearance, all pieces of a puzzle that refused to come together. He'd consulted with FBI profilers, cold case specialists, and forensic experts from across the country, but the consensus was always the same. Without new evidence, the case would likely remain unsolved. The hardest part is knowing someone out there has answers, Kowalski confided to his wife during one of their evening walks around their neighborhood. Barbara didn't vanish into thin air. Someone took her, someone knows what happened, and that person is walking around free while her family suffers. The first anniversary vigil drew over 300 people to Antelope Park, where community members lit candles and shared memories of Barbara. Patricia spoke briefly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. 1 year doesn't diminish our hope, she told the crowd. If anything, it strengthens our resolve. Barbara is still out there, and we're still waiting for her to come home. As the crowd dispersed and the candles flickered out in the evening breeze, Patricia drove to Maple Street and flipped the porch light switch, beginning year 2 of her nightly ritual. The yellow glow spread across the empty driveway, a beacon of hope in an increasingly dark mystery. 5 years had passed since Barbara Robinson's disappearance, and Lincoln had learned to live with an unsolved mystery in its midst. The missing person flyers had long since faded from storefront windows, replaced by announcements for school fundraisers and community events. Yet the psychological impact lingered like a audit shadow over the city's collective consciousness, changing how people moved through their daily routines in subtle but significant ways. The bank where Barbara had made her final ATM transaction had undergone extensive security upgrades, installing motion-activated lighting throughout the parking lot and additional cameras covering every angle. Other businesses followed suit, and by 2014, Lincoln had more surveillance cameras per capita than cities twice its size. The irony wasn't lost on Detective Kowalski. They now had the technology that might have solved Barbara's case. But 5 years too late. Patricia Wells had settled into a rhythm of persistent hope punctuated by waves of grief. Her daily routine included checking the missing person databases, calling Detective Kowalski monthly for updates, and organizing the annual memorial vigil that had become a fixture in Lincoln's calendar of community events. The porch light ritual continued nightly, though the house on Maple Street showed signs of its prolonged emptiness, paint peeling around the windows, weeds growing through cracks in the driveway. Emma Robinson, now 18 and preparing for college, had grown into a young woman shaped by loss and uncertainty. She'd become the family's unofficial spokesperson, articulating their continued hope with a maturity that was both impressive and heartbreaking. "People ask if we've accepted that Mom might be dead," she told a reporter from the Journal-Star during the 5th anniversary coverage. "But acceptance would mean giving up, and we're not ready to do that. Someone knows what happened, and eventually they'll tell the truth." Michael, at 15, channeled his energy into sports and academic achievement, as if excellence might somehow bring his mother back. He developed an encyclopedic knowledge of missing person cases and forensic science, spending hours researching cold cases that had been solved decades after the crimes occurred. His bedroom walls were covered with timelines and maps related to his mother's disappearance, creating an amateur detective's command center that worried Patricia but seemed to help him process his grief. The community's relationship with the case had evolved from active involvement to uncomfortable awareness. Lincoln residents had grown accustomed to checking their locks twice and avoiding isolated areas after dark, behaviors that had become second nature rather than conscious security measures. The city's crime rate hadn't increased significantly, but the perception of safety had been permanently altered. "The Robinson case changed how we think about random crime," explained Dr. Robert Chen, a criminologist at the University of Nebraska who had studied the community impact. "People realized that bad things don't just happen to other people in other places. A mother disappeared from a routine errand in broad public view, and that fundamental vulnerability became part of how Lincoln residents see their world." Local law enforcement had implemented new protocols partly in response to Barbara's case. Missing person investigations now began immediately rather than waiting 24 hours, and the department had invested in technology for faster evidence processing. Detective Kowalski, who had been promoted to sergeant, frequently spoke at law enforcement conferences about the importance of early intervention and community cooperation in missing person cases. The case had also attracted attention from amateur investigators and online communities dedicated to solving cold cases. The Find Barbara Robinson Facebook group had grown to over 3,000 members, including retired detectives, forensic students, and curious citizens who studied the evidence and proposed theories. While most suggestions were impractical or had already been investigated, the sustained attention kept Barbara's story alive in ways that traditional media coverage couldn't match. "Social media has created a new kind of collective memory," observed Dr. Jennifer Walsh, now teaching journalism at UNL, after leaving television news. "Cases that might have been forgotten after a few years now have persistent online communities, keeping them visible. It's changed how families cope with unsolved crimes." The economic impact was subtle, but measurable. Property values in the neighborhoods around the bank had decreased slightly, and several businesses had relocated from the area, though city officials were careful not to attribute these changes directly to Barbara's disappearance. Tourism to Lincoln, never a major economic factor, had been affected by the city's association with an unsolved crime, though local officials rarely acknowledged this connection publicly. The annual vigil had evolved into something approaching a community tradition, drawing participants who hadn't known Barbara personally, but felt connected to her story. Local churches included her in their prayers for missing persons, and the high school's drama department had performed a one-act play about families dealing with unresolved loss, clearly inspired by the Robinson case. As the 5th anniversary approached, Patricia faced a difficult decision about the house on Maple Street. The mortgage had been paid off using Barbara's life insurance policy, but maintaining two residences was becoming financially challenging. Still, selling the house felt like admitting defeat, like giving up the belief that Barbara might someday walk up those front steps and turn off the porch light herself. The silence stretched on, punctuated only by the quiet click of a light switch each evening, and the persistent hope of a family that refused to accept the unacceptable. Detective Maria Santos had been with the Lincoln Police Department's cold case unit for only 6 months, when she inherited a file cabinet full of unsolved investigations that her predecessors had struggled with for years. It was October 2023, 14 years after Barbara Robinson had vanished from the First National Bank parking lot, and Santos brought fresh eyes and modern training to cases that had been stalled by the technological limitations of their era. The cold case unit itself was relatively new, established in 2022 with federal grant money, specifically designated for departments to review unsolved cases using advanced forensic techniques. Santos, a former FBI analyst with expertise in digital forensics and genetic genealogy, had been hired specifically to apply 21st-century science to 20th-century crimes. The Robinson case was perfect for this kind of review, Santos explained to her supervisor, Lieutenant Tom Bradley, as she spread the original evidence files across her desk. We have physical evidence that was collected properly, but couldn't be fully analyzed with 200. The partial fingerprint, the fiber evidence, even the surveillance footage, everything can be re-examined with better tools. The breakthrough began with the fingerprint that had been dismissed as too smudged for identification 14 years earlier. Santos sent the evidence to the FBI's next-generation identification system, which had been upgraded significantly since the original investigation. The new automated fingerprint identification system could detect ridge patterns and minutia points that had been invisible to earlier technology. We're looking at the same piece of evidence through a completely different lens, explained FBI forensics specialist Dr. James Rodriguez during a video conference with the Lincoln team. What appeared to be a useless smudge in 2009 actually contains enough ridge detail for a potential match, thanks to enhancement algorithms that didn't exist when this case was active. The enhanced fingerprint was run through the national database, which now contained millions more records than it had during the original investigation. The system identified 127 potential matches across the country, which Santos and her team began systematically eliminating through additional analysis and cross-referencing with other case details. Simultaneously, Santos applied advanced video enhancement techniques to the bank's surveillance footage. While the cameras hadn't captured Barbara's actual disappearance, they had recorded the parking lot's ambient lighting patterns and shadows that could now be analyzed frame by frame. The enhanced footage revealed a shadow moving in the blind spot behind the concrete pillar, evidence that someone else had been present during the crucial 43 seconds when Barbara vanished from view. Look at timestamp 21:43:17. Santos pointed to her computer screen, where the grainy footage played in slow motion. There's definitely a human shadow moving behind the pillar, and it's too large to be Barbara. Someone was waiting there, positioned exactly where the cameras couldn't see them. The most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the blue cotton fiber that had been found on the ATM card slot. Advanced microscopic analysis revealed that the fiber contained traces of industrial cleaning chemicals and machine oil, suggesting it came from a work uniform rather than casual clothing. More importantly, the specific combination of chemicals created a signature that could be matched to particular types of employment. The chemical analysis points to someone who worked in commercial maintenance or industrial cleaning. Dr. Sarah Kim from the State Crime Lab reported to Santos. The concentration of ammonia-based cleaners and the type of machine oil suggest someone who serviced commercial equipment, possibly HVAC systems or industrial machinery. Santos cross-referenced this occupational profile with the original list of suspects and persons of interest most had been eliminated through alibis or lack of connection to Barbara, but one name stood out: Robert Bobby Mitchell, a 45-year-old maintenance supervisor who had been briefly questioned early in the investigation, but dismissed when he provided an alibi that couldn't be immediately verified. Mitchell had worked for Lincoln Commercial Services, a company that maintained HVAC systems and cleaning equipment for businesses throughout the city. including several clients near the bank where Barbara had disappeared. His work uniform would have been blue cotton, and his daily exposure to industrial chemicals matched the fiber analysis perfectly. The interesting thing about Mitchell is that he was never fingerprinted during the original investigation, Santos noted while reviewing the 2009 case files. He was interviewed as a potential witness because his company serviced the bank's equipment, but he wasn't considered a suspect at the time. Further research revealed that Mitchell had left Lincoln abruptly in late 2009, just 6 months after Barbara's disappearance, citing family problems that required him to move to Colorado. His former employer had provided a forwarding address, but Mitchell had moved several times since then, making his current location unclear. "We need to find Bobby Mitchell and get his fingerprints," Santos told Lieutenant Bradley during their weekly case review. "If his print matches what we found on the ATM, we may finally have our answer to what happened to Barbara Robinson." The investigation was no longer cold. It was burning with the heat of modern science applied to carefully preserved evidence, promising answers that had been waiting 14 years to be discovered. The breakthrough came on a gray Tuesday morning in November 2023, when Detective Maria Santos received a phone call that would finally crack open the Barbara Robinson case. FBI forensic specialist James Rodriguez was calling from Quantico, his voice carrying the excitement that comes with solving a puzzle that has resisted solution for over a decade. "We have a match," Rodriguez announced without preamble. "The enhanced fingerprint from the ATM card slot matches Robert Mitchell. The confidence level is 98.7%, well above the threshold for criminal proceedings." Santos felt her pulse quicken as she pulled up Mitchell's file on her computer screen. The 59-year-old man had been living in Fort Collins, Colorado, under his full name, Robert James Mitchell, working as a maintenance supervisor for a property management company. He'd maintained steady employment and had no criminal record beyond a few traffic violations, making him appear to be exactly what he claimed, a working man who had relocated for family reasons. "There's more," Rodriguez continued. "We ran his DNA profile through CODIS and got a hit on evidence from Barbara Robinson's recovered vehicle. Hair fibers found in the driver's seat contain mitochondrial DNA that's consistent with Mitchell's profile. The car had been located 3 months earlier, thanks to Santos's systematic approach to cold case investigation. She'd contacted every auto salvage yard, impound lot, and vehicle storage facility within a 300-mile radius of Lincoln, providing them with a Honda Civic's VIN number and vehicle description. The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source, a rural property outside Seward, Nebraska, where the car had been abandoned in a remote storage facility that had changed ownership several times since. The vehicle was in remarkable condition for having been abandoned for 14 years, explained crime scene technician Dave Kim, who had processed the Honda when it was recovered. It was stored in a covered building, protected from the elements. Whoever put it there intended to come back for it eventually. The car yielded a treasure trove of evidence that hadn't been available during the original investigation. In addition to the hair fibers, technicians found fingerprints on the steering wheel, door handles, and rear-view mirror that didn't belong to Barbara or her family members. Most significantly, they discovered traces of blood on the passenger seat that had soaked into the fabric and dried, becoming nearly invisible, but still detectable with advanced luminol testing. DNA analysis of the blood confirmed Santos's growing suspicions. It belonged to Barbara Robinson. The pattern suggested she had been injured, possibly unconscious, while sitting in the passenger seat as someone else drove her car away from the bank that night. "The blood spatter analysis tells us a story," explained Dr. Patricia Chen, the forensic pathologist, who had examined the evidence. Barbara sustained a head injury that caused bleeding, but not necessarily a fatal wound. She could have been struck with a blunt object or hit her head during a struggle. The blood pattern suggests she was unconscious but alive when she was placed in the passenger seat. Santos coordinated with Colorado law enforcement to conduct surveillance on Mitchell while she built the case for his extradition. The investigation revealed that Mitchell had lived a seemingly normal life in Fort Collins, maintaining steady employment and even volunteering at a local church. His neighbors described him as quiet but helpful, The kind of man who would shovel sidewalks for elderly residents and help with community cleanup projects. He's exactly the type of person who can hide in plain sight, observed criminal psychologist Dr. Michael Walsh, who consulted on the case. Organized, methodical, able to compartmentalize his actions and present a normal facade to the world. This type of offender often maintains a double life for years or even decades. The motive remained unclear, but Santos had developed a working theory based on the evidence and timeline. Mitchell's company had serviced the bank's HVAC system regularly, giving him legitimate reasons to be familiar with the building's layout and security cameras. He would have known about the blind spot in the parking lot and could have observed Barbara's routine during previous visits to the bank. "We think he may have been planning this for weeks or even months," Santos explained to Patricia Wells during a briefing that had been 14 years in the making. His work gave him access to the bank, knowledge of the security system, and the opportunity to observe potential victims. Barbara was targeted because her routine was predictable. The storage facility where the car was found belonged to a company that Mitchell had worked for briefly in 2009, giving him access to the remote location where he could hide the vehicle. Records showed that he had rented the storage unit under a false name, paying cash for several years before eventually abandoning it when the property changed hands. He kept the car as insurance, Santos theorized. Maybe he planned to dispose of it more permanently later, or thought he might need it as leverage. But when the property was sold and new owners took inventory, his secret hiding place was compromised. The net was closing around Robert Mitchell, but Santos knew that proving he had murdered Barbara Robinson would require more than circumstantial evidence and forensic matches. They needed to find her body and build a case that would hold up in court. The arrest of Robert James Mitchell on December 14, 2023, sent shockwaves through both Lincoln, Nebraska and Fort Collins, Colorado. Detective Maria Santos coordinated with Colorado law enforcement to take Mitchell into custody at his apartment complex on Shield Street, where he'd lived quietly for the past 8 years, under the radar of neighbors who knew him as a helpful maintenance worker and occasional volunteer at the local food bank. Mitchell was eating breakfast and preparing for work when FBI agents and Fort Collins police officers knocked on his door at 6. Security footage from the apartment complex would later show a man who appeared genuinely surprised by the law enforcement presence, calmly setting down his coffee cup and cooperating fully with the arrest. His neighbors gathered in bathrobes and winter coats, watching in stunned silence as the man they knew as Bob was led away in handcuffs. "I've lived next door to him for 3 years," said Margaret Torres, a retired teacher who had frequently borrowed tools from Mitchell and trusted him to water her plants when she traveled. "He fixed my garbage disposal last month and wouldn't accept payment. This has to be some kind of mistake." The reaction in Lincoln was equally dramatic, but tinged with relief that had been 14 years in the making. Patricia Wells received the call from Detective Santos at 7:15 a.m. Mountain Time, just as she was preparing to drive to Barbara's house for the daily porch light ritual that had become as automatic as breathing. "We got him," Santos said simply, her voice carrying the weight of months of investigation and years of family pain. "Robert Mitchell is in custody, and we have enough evidence to charge him with your sister's murder." Patricia sat down heavily in her kitchen chair, suddenly feeling the full weight of 14 years of hope, fear, and determination. Emma and Michael, now adults with lives of their own, rushed to their aunt's house when she called them with the news. The three of them sat around the same kitchen table, where they'd waited for Barbara to come home in March 2009. This time tears of relief mixing with the grief that had never fully healed. The Lincoln Police Department held a press conference that afternoon, with Chief Jennifer Martinez flanked by Detective Santos and FBI representatives. The room was packed with local media, national news crews, and community members who had followed the case for over a decade. "Today, we're announcing the arrest of Robert James Mitchell, age 59, in connection with the disappearance and presumed murder of Barbara Robinson," Chief Martinez announced. "This arrest is the result of advanced forensic analysis applied to evidence collected during the original investigation, combined with excellent detective work by our cold case unit. The details that emerged during Mitchell's interrogation painted a picture of careful planning and cold calculation, Mitchell had observed Barbara's routine for several weeks, noting that she typically visited the bank on Thursday evenings after work. He had positioned himself in the parking lot's blind spot, waiting for the right opportunity to approach her. The interrogation revealed that Mitchell had been struggling with financial problems in 2009. Detective Santos explained to the investigation team. His wife had left him, he was facing foreclosure on his house, and he was drinking heavily. He initially claimed he only intended to rob Barbara, but the evidence suggests premeditation and planning that goes beyond a spontaneous crime. Mitchell's confession, delivered after 18 hours of questioning over 2 days, was methodical and emotionally detached. He described approaching Barbara as she returned to her car, striking her with a tire iron when she resisted, and then driving her unconscious body to a remote location outside Lincoln. He claimed she died from her head injury during the drive, though medical experts questioned this timeline based on the blood evidence. The location of Barbara's remains became the focus of intense investigation. Mitchell led authorities to a wooded area near Branched Oak Lake, about 20 miles northwest of Lincoln, where he claimed to have buried her body in a shallow grave. Ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs were brought in to search the area, but after 4 days of excavation, no remains were found. "Mitchell's playing games with us," Santos confided to Patricia during one of their regular briefings. "He's given us 3 different locations for Barbara's remains, each one requiring extensive search efforts. It's possible he's trying to maintain some kind of control over the situation. Or he genuinely doesn't remember after 14 years. The community's reaction was complex, mixing relief at having answers with horror at the betrayal of trust. Mitchell had been a familiar figure in Lincoln's business district, servicing equipment at dozens of locations where people had seen him regularly and never suspected anything sinister. His ability to blend in and appear trustworthy had allowed him to operate undetected for years. Local businesses that had employed Mitchell's services reviewed their security protocols, and several building owners admitted they felt violated knowing that a murderer had had access to their properties. The psychological impact extended beyond the immediate crime to questions about how well anyone really knows their neighbors, co-workers, and service providers. The search for Barbara's remains continued, even as prosecutors prepared their case against the man who had finally been identified as her killer. The trial of Robert James Mitchell began on September 3, 2024, in Lancaster County District Court, presided over by Judge Patricia Morrison, in a courtroom packed with media representatives, community members, and a family that had waited 15 years for this moment. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Sarah Chen, faced the challenging task of proving murder without a body, relying instead on forensic evidence, Mitchell's partial confession, and the methodical investigation that had finally brought him to justice. Mitchell's defense attorney, Thomas Bradley, a veteran criminal lawyer from Omaha, had built his case around the absence of Barbara's remains and the long gap between the crime and his client's arrest. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Bradley said during his opening statement, "the state wants you to convict my client of murder, based on a confession extracted after 18 hours of interrogation and forensic evidence that could have multiple explanations." But Prosecutor Chen had assembled a compelling array of evidence that told the story of Barbara Robinson's final hours with scientific precision. The enhanced fingerprint from the ATM card slot, the DNA evidence from the recovered Honda Civic, the detailed forensic analysis of blood spatter patterns created a narrative that was difficult to refute. "The evidence speaks for Barbara Robinson," Chen told the jury during her opening statement. "She cannot tell you what happened on March 15, 2009, but science can. The fingerprints, the DNA, the blood evidence, all of it points to one conclusion: Robert Mitchell took Barbara Robinson's life and spent 15 years trying to hide that fact." The trial's most dramatic moment came when Patricia Wells took the witness stand to testify about her sister's character and the impact of her disappearance on the family. Wearing a blue dress that had belonged to Barbara, Patricia spoke directly to the jury about 15 years of uncertainty and grief. "We never stopped believing that someone would be held accountable," Patricia said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Barbara was a wonderful mother who would never have abandoned her children. She was taken from us by someone who destroyed not just her life but the lives of everyone who loved her." Emma and Michael Robinson, now 28 and 25 respectively, also testified about growing up without their mother and the long-term psychological impact of her unsolved disappearance. Emma, who had become a social worker specializing in trauma counseling, spoke about how the case had shaped her career and her understanding of how violence ripples through communities. "My mother's disappearance taught me that evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces," Emma told the jury. "Mr. Mitchell serviced equipment at my elementary school. I probably saw him dozens of times and never knew he was the person who had stolen my mother from me." The forensic evidence proved overwhelming. Dr. James Rodriguez from the FBI testified about the fingerprint analysis, while DNA expert Dr. Patricia Kim explained how advanced testing had identified Mitchell's genetic material in Barbara's car. Crime scene analyst Dave Kim walked the jury through the blood spatter evidence, using charts and photographs to demonstrate how Barbara had been injured and positioned in the passenger seat. Mitchell's own testimony proved to be his downfall. Against his attorney's advice, he took the stand to deny the murder charges, claiming that Barbara had died accidentally during a robbery attempt, and that he had panicked and hidden her body. Under cross-examination, Prosecutor Chen systematically dismantled his story, highlighting inconsistencies and challenging his claim that the encounter had been spontaneous. "Mr. Mitchell, you've given investigators 3 different locations for Barbara Robinson's remains," Chen said during a tense exchange. "If this was truly an accident that you regret, why haven't you helped her family find peace by telling them where she's buried?" Mitchell's response was rambling and evasive, reinforcing the prosecution's argument that he was a manipulative individual who continued to torment Barbara's family even after his arrest. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. Judge Morrison sentenced Mitchell to life in prison without the possibility of parole, noting that his continued refusal to reveal the location of Barbara's remains demonstrated a callous disregard for the suffering of the victim's family. The courtroom erupted in applause when the sentence was announced, a rare display of emotion that the judge allowed to continue for several moments. Outside the courthouse, Patricia Wells stood with Emma and Michael for a final press conference, flanked by Detective Santos and the legal team that had brought Mitchell to justice. The family announced that they would continue searching for Barbara's remains and working to support other families dealing with missing persons cases. "Today isn't really about closure," Patricia told the assembled reporters. "Barbara is still gone, and we still don't know where she's buried, but we know that justice has been served, and that Robert Mitchell will never hurt another family the way he hurt ours." That evening, for the first time in over 15 years, Patricia Wells drove to the house on Maple Street and turned off the porch light. The symbolic gesture marked not an ending, but a transformation, from desperate hope to peaceful remembrance, from active searching to quiet healing. The Barbara Robinson case stands as both a tragedy and a testament to the power of persistence, advancing technology, and community solidarity. 15 years after a devoted mother vanished from a routine errand, justice was finally served through the dedication of law enforcement officials, who refused to let her case fade into obscurity. Detective Maria Santos's methodical application of modern forensic techniques to carefully preserved evidence demonstrates why cold case units deserve continued funding and support. The enhanced fingerprint analysis, advanced DNA testing, and sophisticated blood spatter examination that solved this case represent the cutting edge of criminal investigation, offering hope to thousands of families dealing with unsolved disappearances. Perhaps most importantly, the case reveals how predators can hide within our communities, presenting ordinary facades while harboring dangerous intentions. Robert Mitchell's ability to maintain employment, volunteer at churches, and earn his neighbors' trust while concealing his crime illustrates the need for continued vigilance and the importance of supporting victims' families, even when cases seem hopeless. Patricia Wells's 15-year vigil, symbolized by the porch light that burned every night, became a beacon of hope for other families facing similar tragedies. Her refusal to give up, combined with the determination of law enforcement officials and the support of an entire community, ultimately led to Mitchell's conviction and Barbara's vindication. The search for Barbara's remains continues, But her family has found a different kind of peace. The porch light may be turned off, but Barbara Robinson's legacy lives on through the cold case protocols her disappearance helped establish, the families her story has inspired to keep fighting, and the reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, can still prevail. For Barbara Robinson's family, the porch light can finally be turned off, not in surrender, but in peace.